The Omega Seamaster 300 Spectre limited edition is just when Omega started getting things right. It's the first Omega to compete with Rolex. Cue the music. Password please. Shaken not stirred. Oh, standard time horology Nato strap. This is the blue-gray, also a variation of the Bond strap. Do check it out, links in description and links also up here. There's free shipping on all the straps and I would really like it if you could have a look at them, see if you like them. Okay, where's the music? Now I'd like to give a quick plug to Ken Watches, as they're the ones who let me get a hands-on with this piece and most of the new watches on the channel. So they're a watch dealer in Hong Kong. Do check them out at kenwatches.com. So back in 2015, when this was launched alongside Spectre, it was basically a reinterpretation of the original 1957 Seamaster 300. This is the Bond Spectre limited edition. So yes, another limited edition by Omega, no surprise. This was limited to 7,007 units. So very limited. But then again, Omega only recently understood how to really do a proper limited edition watch, only in the last 2 years or so. Omega has had a slew of cheesy Bond Seamasters for the longest time, and this is an exception to that. If you remember, some of those Seamasters had god-awful emblems, like for example the counterbalance of the second's hand was 007. Ugh. Back when it was launched, it came with a price tag of $7,500 US. Now, 7,500 is not a lot for Rolex, but it's a lot for Omega. This is one of the first pieces to really be quite a bit more expensive than their standard range, even though it was a Bond limited edition. Typically, the other Seamaster Diver 300 meters, which were Bond editions, were just a little bit more expensive than the regular one, around between $4,000 to $5,000 US. So this watch was really going for Submariner territory. And the aesthetics of this watch are also quite similar to the Submariner, even though it's the reinterpretation of the original 1957 Omega watch. Fortunately, like a Submariner, it has, for the most part, retained its value. 7,007 pieces is not a small number, but somehow they've managed to do this. If I'm not wrong, this was one of the first Omegas to actually be introduced on a NATO strap. This went along with the Bond franchise, and there were a lot of press shots of Daniel Craig wearing it with a suit, and that was their angle to promote this piece and bring back the NATOs. I think this launch particularly helped make a NATO undersuit a lot more acceptable to the general public. Sean Connery did it first with the Rolex Submariner reference 6538, but that was not as well done, particularly that NATO didn't really fit the lug width. So to the specifications now, a 41mm case. It has a thickness of 14.8 millimeters. Now, a Submariner has a thickness of 13 millimeters, but a Submariner also has a flat sapphire crystal, and it doesn't have a display case back. This one's got a lovely domed sapphire crystal and a display case back. So that alone should be about at least 2 millimeters. So the watch alone could have been done a lot thinner, but I do appreciate the display case back, as that's one of my favorite things to look for in a watch. The most striking thing about this watch is Omega's slightly controversial use of faux patina on the markers and hands. So essentially the lume application is brown, even though the lume is not actually brown in the dark. So this was meant to hark back to the vintage aesthetic that really blossomed back in 2015 to 2018 almost. There was this newfound craze for vintage watches, and suddenly vintage was all the rage. And so I think that kind of influenced Omega to do this. Apart from this watch, at the time in 2015, I don't think any watch company was really using faux patina on the hands. So at the moment, it was very controversial. But now we've got tons of vintage inspired pieces in the market, and faux patina looking lume is not all that surprising. So I do think this was actually one of the watches that paved the way for brown lume application on new watches. Now, another thing about the dial, the lollipop seconds hand. I found this quite interesting as a design choice. I like the contrast, but I don't really care for the lollipop, because you follow the seconds hand from the center of the dial outwards, and then you see a precise measurement, and then you keep following it, and then you finally get to the point where you need to see what the seconds is, and the joke's on you. I don't think Bond would tolerate that. What do you think of it? Do you like it? Comment below. Now, as I mentioned before, one of my favorite design choices on a watch is a display case back. I enjoy a display case back regardless of the type of watch. It could be a diver, it could be a field watch, it could be a pilot's watch, it could be a dress piece, but I love the display case back. Even if the movement is not eloquently finished, I still want to see it. I know it's not that practical in diver and field watches, but I still enjoy it. I'm never going to exceed the limitations of a display case back in my usage of a watch. Now, this watch satisfies the craving I have for display case backs so wonderfully well. The finishing of the movement is called Geneva Waves, and that's probably because Switzerland is landlocked. Now, the movement is a coaxial caliber 8400. Now, the 8000 series movements from Omega are fantastic. They've all got similar specs, 60 hours of power reserve, and it's got 15,000 Gauss worth of magnetic resistance. Now, the mil-Gauss is 1000, this is 15,000. I really like that aspect of this movement as well. I love the pop of red with those synthetic rubies littered across the movement as well. It's really beautifully done. Now, the bracelet of this watch I really like. It wears beautifully. The links are really thin and they really help the contour around the wrist, and it's very comfortable. I quite like the design, weight and comfort of it. One thing about the bracelet though, the clasp I'm not that much of a fan of, and the engraving, the large 007 engraving, I'm even less a fan of. I think they could have done it a lot more eloquently than that, and I would understand why Bond would want to wear a standard time horology Nato instead. So this, in my opinion, is the first Omega to actually compete with Rolex. I think it really takes the Submariner head on. If you have a look at the Submariner from the time, 2015, it was the 116610, ceramic sub, 40mm, very similar dimensions, slightly smaller, obviously thinner, and the watches were very similarly priced. So very much the same market, but then one hand you have a limited edition watch and it's all with that Bond craze, and on the other hand you just have a time-tested classic design. Another key thing is James Bond is actually linked to both pieces in a unique manner. So Sean Connery with the reference 6538 and a couple of other Submariners in the early days of Bond, and now this. In general, the Omega technically outperforms the Rolex with little to no effort. More importantly, you'd almost never come across one of these, whereas the Submariner, well, at least the 116610 is quite common, relatively speaking, of course. So I think this was the first watch where Omega really started to get things right, especially when it came to the Bond franchise and special editions. So that's been it, guys. Thank you for watching this video. And if you want to hear my thoughts on the Patek 5711, which I actually thought was extremely underwhelming, click this video here. That's been it. See you guys in the next one. Cheers.